Hi, Andrew.
Hi there.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Sorry for the delay.
Not a problem. Technology is great sometimes, isn't it?
It's fabulous, yes.
When it works.
Alrighty, well, I haven't actually met you, Andrew, so I'm Jennifer. I'm Sean's other half. And this is some of our high school students, my English class, and we have Mr. Campbell in the front in the lovely green, so happy St. Paddy's, and his
Hello.
Comtech class. And class, this is Mr. Andrew Lawton, who is a award-winning radio announcer, blogger, pundit, kind of go-around guy. Does everything. We'll go with that.
You've covered all the bases.
I covered all the bases. Awesome. So I'm just actually going to turn it over to you. And the students, if they have a question, can they just throw up their hand and come up to the mic and ask you?
Yeah, well, one person in the back was already throwing up her hands dancing. So specify between if it's a dance move or a question. But absolutely, I'm coming into this a little bit blind. I've never done anything like this before. So absolutely, if anyone has any questions at any point, please go right ahead.
Awesome. All right, thank you. I'll turn it over to you and let you go.
All right, perfect. Well, as your teacher, just to start things off, mentioned, I do have a lot of different titles, a lot of different hats that I wear. And it's always great when people leave when you're 30 seconds in too. That's always great. In any case, it is a lot of fun for me to be here. I love using new media, digital media, all of these sorts of things. And the reason that I'm actually working in radio now, the reason that I work in the job that I do, is because I got my start doing exactly this sort of stuff, which is talking to people in non-traditional means, talking to people in different ways that are not necessarily conventional. In media right now, we're looking at an industry that is changing rapidly every day. So people aren't, well, here's a question. So you guys are all grade 11, grade 12, right? Okay, so put up your hand if you have read a newspaper, a physical newspaper, in the last month. Okay, now put up your hand if you've read a blog post or an online article in the last month. Okay, a lot of you read newspapers, so that's good. However, the reason that more of you put up your hand is the same for blogging and online articles is the same reason that a lot of my friends are looking for work right now, because media has changed. So people are now focusing on things like blogs and online media. People are watching stuff on demand, on YouTube, on Netflix, and less on TV when someone tells you you have to watch TV. And similarly to radio. People don't like to necessarily tune in as much from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which is when I'm on, because instead people want to do everything on their own time, on their own terms. And as a consumer, that's great. I get to watch House of Cards on Netflix when I want. I get to listen to podcasts. I get to watch archives of old interviews. But as someone that works in the industry, people also aren't listening as much to me when I want them to. So it's a catch-22 there. So media has to constantly evolve. And I think this is where I can talk to you guys in terms that you'll really understand, because you're part of the generation that's really shaping this change. You're part of the generation that's really driving this shift to have happened. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself and then I'll throw back to questions. But seriously, if while I'm talking, you guys have any questions about what I'm talking about, or a question about me, or a question about even politics in general, or a question about, I don't know, Cambodian rice import tariffs. I don't know much, but I can try to do it. The benefit of being, by the way, at a computer for this is that I can, like, if I don't know something, I can Google it, and hopefully you won't know that I'm doing that because I'll just stare looking in the same place. But I got my start, as your teacher mentioned, in podcasting. So I am working full-time in radio. I have a show in Ontario on AM 980, but also I am a guest host on News Talk 770 in Calgary. And occasionally, like next weekend, I actually guest host on a national show called The Roy Green Show, which is carried all across Canada at stations in my country, or in my company rather, and yes, in my country too. And I also write for the Calgary Sun, the Edmonton Sun. So I do have an Alberta connection, definitely. I'm not just one of these people out in Ontario, because I know you guys don't like us, and it's okay. We're used to it by now. But one thing I will say is that most people in radio and media, regardless of whether it was in Alberta, in Ontario, or even in the US, most people went to school for it. Most people either took radio broadcasting in college or they took journalism in university. I did none of those things. I took political science at university, a general degree in politics, which I don't want to discourage you from taking it, but I'll say go in with clear. I can't say it's given me much in the way of practical knowledge, but everything that I do from a media perspective, I'm doing because I sort of fought my way in through new media, through social media. I had, going back to 2009, I was working in Ottawa at the time. I was working on Parliament Hill for the government. And I had at the end of the summer, I had some health issues. So I had to leave my job. And I was in the hospital for quite a while. And I got really, really bored. I got bored. Try laying in a bed for a month and you'll understand what I'm talking about. So I had a laptop with me. I just started writing. And then that turned to blogging. And then, believe it or not, people started to pay attention to what I was writing. I don't know how good it was, but people were reading it. So from there, ultimately, what started as just something to kill the time quickly gathered an audience. This is media today. You don't need to have the degree in journalism. You don't need to have a print newspaper, and you can have an audience. Now, there are good parts of this and bad parts of this. The good part is that people like me have been able to form a career. The bad part is that people like Justin Bieber have been able to form a career. So unfortunately, the same thing that has allowed me to prosper has also inflicted him on the world. And he's actually like from an hour from me, so I really apologize on behalf of Ontario too. But the fact of the matter is anyone has an audience. And we've all read horror stories of what's happened when something that people have written on social media has ended up becoming public later on when they didn't want it to be. And you guys are in high school now. I'm sure you've seen people that have gone through things like cyberbullying, or maybe you have yourself. So we have to look at this new creation here, social media, and look at it for what it is. There are good parts to it and there are bad parts to it. But no matter what, it's here to stay. This isn't something we're getting rid of. This isn't something we're moving past. We have to figure out as individuals and also as consumers, as Canadians, how we're going to respond to it and how we're going to utilize it. So to go back to my story here, I was blogging, and then eventually I had been doing it for a couple of years, and I figured out, you know what, I want to do a little bit more with this. I want to do a little bit more. I had never imagined going into radio, but what was happening is I was writing about all these things, and I was writing about interviews that someone did, and I wondered, you know, why am I not doing my own? You know, I'm a blogger. I don't need to respond to something that's already out there. I can start creating my own stories, creating my own news, creating my own interviews. So I started a podcast, and it was basically an extension of what I was doing online, except I was talking about it for an hour instead of writing about it for an hour. And it had a much more conversational feel to it. And I look at something like what we're doing today. I could have written out, you know, a series of notes and spent time and sent it to you all, and it would be really boring. Now, this way might be boring for you as well. You've been very patient so far, but it's a lot easier to convey a message when you're talking to someone than it is by just writing. So the podcast was born. A friend of mine who was also blogging and I teamed up, and we started basically doing what was a weekly show. And then that became, because the audience was there, a twice weekly show. And then that kept going and going and going. And before you know it, this is leading to traditional media reaching out to us and wanting us to comment on issues. So people like CBC and CTV were coming and saying, hey, do you want to talk about this? Do you want to talk about this? Because the one thing that we were doing is not hiding that we were opinionated. We weren't hiding that we had strong opinions on the subjects at hand. I'm a political pundit. I'm not a reporter. And it ultimately got a really good career going for me as far as being just a talker, a talking head on TV, radio, etc. And I still am, although on a bit more of a large platform now. So what we ended up doing with that was really leveraging this into a brand. It wasn't just a show, it was something that we were promoting, something we were starting to make money from. Not a lot, but at the time, considering that it was something I was doing for fun, even if you get a couple $100 a week out of it, that's still pretty good. And from there, in 2013 or 2012 it would have been, I had the opportunity locally to take my show on traditional radio instead. A local radio station had come to me and said, look, we like what you're doing. We like the brand you've created. We want you to host a permanent show for us. And I actually thought about it. I mean, at one point, it would have been an opportunity that I would have been so grateful for. But the other side of it was that, do I want to give up what I have right now online, which is an audience that is not limited by geography, which is the freedom to write about and talk about whatever I want and be sort of bound to a radio station. I didn't want that, but I took the job anyway because I figured, hey, I can still do both. So this is what I've done. I've focused from 1 to 3 in the afternoon on the radio show that I have here. But outside of that, I've still focused on maintaining that audience that I built through new media, people who have tuned into my podcast years ago and are still listening to the radio show I do now because I've built that relationship with them. So underscoring social media is relationship building. A tool is just a platform. I look at that microphone that's standing in the middle of the room there. That's a microphone. Anyone can get up and talk into that microphone, but what you're saying is what's most important. And we need to embrace that technology is letting us communicate in different ways, but the message hasn't really changed that much. People are still talking about the same issues. We're just talking about them in different ways. And I don't know if any of you know the name Marshall McLuhan. I'm sure the older people in the room would, but Marshall McLuhan, famous marketing expert, had said once, the medium is the message. And that basically means that, look, your message is not just what you say, but it's how you say it. And there's a reason that politicians now, like Justin Trudeau, do Ask Me Anythings on Reddit. There's a reason that people are doing full interviews with Vice. There's a reason that there are Google Hangouts that Barack Obama does and YouTube videos, because everyone is coming around to what bloggers and podcasters knew 5, 6, 7 years ago, which is that the landscape is shifting. And newspapers used to fight it. Radio stations used to fight it. And now everyone's embracing it. And that's why you're having newspapers that are able to start rebounding a little bit. I mean, we're still seeing mass layoffs. I'm glad I don't work in the print industry right now, because radio is tough, but print is really tough right now from an industry perspective. But what we're seeing happen is people starting to reclaim these tools. You had the Toronto Star, which has a big iPad edition now, a special edition of its newspaper that you can only get on a tablet. There are also paywalls that newspapers are trying to do, so to get people to pay for content, whereas other ones are just basically having ads. On my radio show, for example, anyone can listen, and if you want to listen online, it's free. We don't charge for it. Will that be long-term? I don't know. That happens in an office down the hall for me. I don't have anything to do with that decision. I like the idea of giving it away for free, but I also like the idea of getting paid. So if they say, hey, Andrew, we'll give it away for free, but you don't get paid anymore, I'll say, no, put a paywall up on that stuff. But we're not there yet, thankfully. But what I want to talk to you about today, I mean, a little bit career-wise, if any of you are interested in media, or even as a hobby, starting to blog, podcast, I'm happy to help with that. But even any questions, I mean, you can ask questions. I know you guys are thinking of things like university college right now. You guys are thinking of, obviously, maybe politics going on. You've had some very interesting stuff happening there in the last year. So use me for whatever you'd like, but I'm happy to take any questions you guys have right now. And I'll let perhaps your teacher moderate if need be. But assuming you won't have any brawls at the microphone, I'm pretty sure you guys can manage this yourselves.
Hi, my name's Kalen.
Hi.
So my question for you is, right up to the mic, sounds good. What's one interview that you haven't done yet that you'd really like to do?
Ooh, an interview I haven't done yet. So someone who's living, right? Okay. I would take Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Now, I interviewed Liberal leader Justin Trudeau back about a year and a half ago, and that was a lot of fun, but he hasn't been returning my calls since then. So now that he's Prime Minister, and we've seen a lot more of the priorities that he's unveiled, we've seen a lot more of the things that he's wanting to advance, that's one that I would love to do, just because I interviewed Stephen Harper a few times when he was Prime Minister, and I interviewed Kim Campbell as well, who was Prime Minister for about 3 days, it seems like. But at the same time, I mean, when you're talking to a sitting Prime Minister, it's interesting because they're a politician, but you also have to have a huge level of respect for the office that they hold. So I'm not a Liberal, and I don't hide that, but at the same time, he's still my Prime Minister. So that dynamic is interesting, but I'd like to interview him now that he's in office to talk about, you know, look, what's the economy like? What are you going to do about it?
Actually, I'll ask again, I guess, go back to that. if you could interview someone who might not be with us, then who would that be?
That's a good question. I don't get to be speechless on my show every now and then, so I'm glad. Interview someone that's no longer. I would actually, if I'm taking a completely sort of out to lunch look at this, I would take someone like I'd like to John A. Macdonald, actually, Sir John A. Macdonald, because talking to the guy who was the first prime minister of the country and saying, look, this is the Canada today. Because we have to look back, and I don't know if there are any history fans. I know I am now, but I certainly wasn't when I was in high school, so I don't blame you if you find it boring. But when I look back at that, I wonder, okay, did he know what he was creating? Did he know what that would become? Was the goal ever for Canada to become a more independent country, or did he always want it to be basically a British province, which is what it was up until Confederation? So I would say that would be a really fun one. And of course, why not? Just to make it interesting, throw George Washington in there. Get the American perspective on that as well.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question.
Okay. All right, we've got another one of my brave souls.
I should have paid some of you to have some questions planted here.
Oh, geez. Okay. Hi, I'm Brenna.
And
Hi. And my question is for you. As technology is rapidly developing and media prevails over other forms of communication, what threats, if any, do you believe media may be imposing on our future generations due to an increase in techno-isolation within society and a decline of traditional communication practices?
that is a really technical question. One of the things is product placement. This wasn't sponsored by Starbucks, but you're going to see increasingly media doing stuff like that. I'm going to answer your question based on where I think you were going, but if I'm going off track, please do stop me here. I think one of the biggest challenges, because you're talking about what the dangers are of that, right? I think one of the challenges is that we've gotten so focused now on the technique of how do we reach the most, the greatest number of people, that a lot of people have lost sight of that relationship that needs to happen to person. So just as an example, when I started out in radio, one of the big pieces of advice I got from someone who helped me was, remember, you're not talking to a room full of people. I mean, I am now, but you're not talking to a room full of people. You're talking to one person. Everyone who hears you, who's listening to you on the radio, is listening to you as though you're in their living room, because you are. You're sitting beside them in their car. You're in their living room. You are sitting beside them on the bus. So people are, as you mentioned, isolated in that. And you have to never lose sight of that intimate nature of media. And I think radio especially, because radio is such a low-tech medium. I mean, you can literally just have a little thing in your hand and you can turn on a radio station and walk around with it. And with technology, I mean, you can do that with TV now as well. But radio's always been there. It's not really changed. We're still operating on the same frequencies. We're still operating through the same technology. So we focus on how many Instagram followers do we get? How many shares on Facebook do we get? How many likes on Tinder? I don't know how things work, but we talk about how many likes and shares and stuff like that we get. It's easy to lose sight of the fact that you are still building relationships one-to-one. So dealing with that isolation, I think for starters, we need to recognize that it exists, which a lot of people don't. And I'm lucky that I didn't have to go through school when it was basically a battle for who had the most, shares and likes and friends and followers and that sort of stuff, because I wouldn't have had many, I assure you. I would not have been in the top category there. But at the same time, in media, it's very similar. I mean, it's one thing for me to say I have, 10,000 some odd Twitter followers, but if I'm not talking to them, if I'm not engaging with them, it really doesn't matter that much.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you totally covered the question, so don't worry.
I hope I did. Use big words there.
Sorry.
No, I'm glad you did. It challenges me.
Okay. Hi, my name's Grace. So I have a couple of questions, actually. This one's from Ms. McCormick, actually. It says, could you discuss how your broadcasting through podcasting came about, and what pitfalls you would recommend avoiding, and what things an amateur should consider doing.
Okay. I talked a little bit earlier about the transition from broadcasting to podcasting. To simplify it, I got lucky. I had a traditional radio station that came to me and said, hey, we'd love it for you to do a show. Now, what I didn't tell you is that I was only with them for about 9 months, and then I went to a bigger radio station, and that's where I am today. So that won't happen to most people. I got very lucky there. But if I were to go back, what I would have done differently, knowing what I know now, is really aggressively pursued myself a little bit more, because I focused on building my own audience. I focused on building my podcast audience, building my blog audience. What I didn't try to do was get the attention of traditional media. I wasn't actively sending it to radio stations, sending it to TV stations, sending it to newspapers. I was just letting the audience sort of grow on its own. And I think that helped me in some ways. But if my goal at the time, which remember, it wasn't, I mean, I never wanted to go into media, but if my goal at the time was to do that, what I would have done was focused a lot more on trying to make that transition into traditional media. I should qualify that, though, by saying that back in 2011, 2012, even though that was only 4 or 5 years ago, traditional media still hadn't embraced new media yet. So there was still a big wall between your major networks and your major corporate media companies and people like me, that we were sort of like the guys who were sitting in our underwear in our basements, like just typing on a laptop. There wasn't really much of a respect there. I mean, they were right, but there still wasn't really a respect of the power of that medium yet. So it's easier now because companies have recognized it. So if I were going through what I went through then now, what I would be doing would be the same thing. I'd still be focusing on my content, but really actively soliciting the interest and awareness of radio hosts, of TV hosts. Because in traditional media, we're always looking for content. We're always looking for voices. We're always looking for people. And if you watch CBC through the day now, I know you're busy, you're not missing much, I assure you. But if you watch CBC during the day, throughout the whole day, they have a bunch of people on, this blogger, that blogger, to respond to news that's happening, because it helps them look modern and youthful and edgy. And if I was one of those bloggers, getting on that, getting that recognition is invaluable, because then you can sort of use that to promote your own platform. So you're competing against so many other people now. That's the problem. The more blogging is mainstreamed, the more you're competing against other bloggers, other podcasters. And ultimately, most of them aren't good. So if you're a good one, you've got to really do stuff that sets you apart from that crowd.
Thank you. And also, I was wondering what your opinion on the political situation in Alberta right now is.
May I speak candidly, Mrs. McCormick?
Of course.
Okay, so I'll back up a little bit. I have been to Alberta a few times. My brother is actually lives in Whitecourt, Alberta, so up north. And I guest host on News Talk 770 in Calgary. Now, about a year and a half ago, one of their longtime hosts, Dave Taylor, he was a former MLA, he decided to retire. So I was filling in for most of the summer while they were finding his replacement. Now, here's the interesting part. So there were a few times where I was on air and I was talking about Danielle Smith and how she set, the Wild Rose Party back, and how she set Alberta back, and she could have been the premier, and she was a traitor to her own people, and all this sort of stuff. She now hosts that show. So it's amazing how things can change, but she was ultimately hired at the end of the summer to be the permanent host. And I will say, Danielle, I consider her a friend. She's done a much better job in radio than she did, I think, in her final days as Wild Rose leader. But ultimately, when you have such a fractioned support base, I mean, in Ontario, we have one center-right party, and that's the PC party. And I actually had the leader on my show about 2 hours ago, as a matter of fact. And federally, we have one conservative party. You guys are too young to remember this firsthand, but can anyone, I'm assuming the microphone will pick it up, can anyone shout the name of the party that used to be the second conservative party federally? Come on, guys. This is like 12 years ago.
I was like 6.
Okay, fair enough. I'll have to talk to your politics teacher later on, but it was the Canadian Alliance Party. So there was another Conservative party, and it was actually very similar to what's happening in Alberta right now. You had the PC Party of Canada, and then you had the Canadian Alliance Party. It was called the Reform Party before then, and Preston Manning, obviously an Albertan, was the founder of that party. But what happened there was you had, for the 2004 election, that was the first time there was one Conservative party federally running than there had been since, I believe it was 88. So Alberta is seeing the same problem now, where you have Conservatives that are split between the PC party and the Alliance Party. Now, outside of Alberta, people view Alberta as the Texas of Canada. People have this vision in their mind of cowboy hats, Conservatives. They think everyone, I think, runs around on horses. Like, people don't understand the demographics of Alberta. But people think Alberta is the Conservative province. So when you have an NDP majority that takes over, everyone else in the country is like, what the heck is happening? People didn't really understand it. I had a bit better of an understanding that it was going to happen because I was guest hosting in Alberta and I was talking to people about what was going on. But ultimately, we had in Ontario, going back into the 80s now, we had an NDP premier who was elected named Bob Rae, and he was more surprised than anyone else the night that he was elected. There was a photo of him that became famous, of him realizing he had won, and the guy looked so confused, like he never imagined in a million years that he would ever win. And I think Rachel Notley was probably in a very similar boat. She didn't really realize that she was joining a potentially winning team. But what she's demonstrated is what happens when you have people that fundamentally believe in the same thing. I mean, Conservatives believe, generally speaking, in smaller government and lower taxes. And we can debate about what the right or wrong answers are politically. I'm trying to simplify this to give more of an objective view. But when you have people that believe in that are split between two parties, it's going to be impossible for them to ever have a long-standing victory. So it's unsurprising what's happening in Alberta, and for a province that relies so much on energy, having a leader that doesn't seem to value the energy sector as much as her predecessors have, I think are going to be posing some very difficult questions. But again, she's also teamed up with a federal prime minister that is approaching things from a very similar perspective, which is not that oil is the most important thing to Canada's economy and to Alberta's economy. So I think that she will perhaps be better than some of the speculators are anticipating, because she knows that she has a lot of eyes on her. She knows that there is a bar that she doesn't want to be kept under as just a one-term premier. But at the same time, opposition parties need to get over their past grievances. And I don't know if there can ever really be a victory for people on the right in Alberta if you have the Wild Rose and the PC parties as two separate wings, because they're going after the same votes, especially with NDP government. It's just a matter of how far people are going to run away to the right.
I think that's pretty fair of what you just said. And I think in this town, we're feeling that bit of a crunch, and we're hoping that you're right about what she's possibly going to do, because we're facing the Sheerness power plant closing. We're facing the downturn in oil and gas in our area, and those are two of our bigger industries. So,
and look at how much animosity there is towards pipelines. If you look at Eastern Canada people, Quebecers, National as well, it's all part of the same problem there. Absolutely.
That was our elementary bell, if you heard that. All right. Do we have some more questions, people? Oh, I have Colton is coming back to talk to you.
Hey, I'm Colton.
Hi.
What do you predict will happen in the upcoming American election?
I love prediction questions. I usually try to word them in a way that I'm right no matter what happens. I'll try to be a little bit more clear this time, though. I do the politician answer sometimes, so I just lay out both options and just hope people will hear the one that ended up happening. If you asked me last week what could happen, I would be able to give you this big, long scenario where, you know, Florida Senator Marco Rubio finally woos people over. He wins Florida. He rides to victory and becomes the president. I like Marco Rubio. I don't think that would be a terrible idea. We saw on Tuesday that's not going to happen. Donald Trump won every county in Florida except for the one that Marco Rubio lived in. And Marco Rubio obviously stepped down. Ted Cruz hasn't made a huge impact. The fact of the matter is, and people don't necessarily know the math of this because it's a really complicated process, even if Donald Trump loses every single state between now and the Republican convention, every single state, he still might not lose the nomination. Because the way it works, he's already won so much. Even if he loses everything, all it will mean is that there's what's called a contested convention, which means he'll have more delegates than anyone else, but he won't have the majority of delegates. So people will get to duke it out in Cleveland in July. Now, I think at this point, Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee. I don't like that idea, but as a Canadian radio host, I'm like, you know what? It gives me lots to talk about at least. And this is the problem. I mean, it's the same as when Rachel Notley got elected. I wasn't happy about it, but I'm like, you know what? It gives me like 4 years of radio content that I can work with at least. So unfortunately, when I make a living criticizing the government, I sometimes want undesirable outcomes to make the show better. But as far as Donald Trump goes, I mean, he is basically bringing his reality show to the American political process right now. Here's what I like to ask about the Donald Trump scenario, though. Why did he get there? Because we can lament that he did if you're not a Donald. But let me put it this way. Who likes Donald Trump in the room? Let me see who I'm talking about here first. Okay. You're more than I am, but I understand that. The reason he's popular isn't because people like what he says or what he stands for or his hairdo. It's not that people like that. It's that people like that he's like no one they've ever seen before. He is the most opposite to anyone who's ever sought political office in the United States before. And people hate politicians. People hate Republicans. People hate Democrats. People hate politicians so much that when you have someone who's the anti-politician, people don't care about what he's actually saying. And it's like what I said earlier, the medium is the message. People don't care about his message. They just care that they're getting it from someone who is politically incorrect. Now, I'm politically incorrect. I hate political correctness, but I also think that you have to have some substance there. And my fear with Donald Trump is that he's winning based on being like nobody else, but he's not really winning on his own merits. Now, when we look at the Democrat side, you have Hillary Clinton, who has really become the most politician-y politician in America. Her husband was president. She's been around for decades. She was a senator. She's under FBI investigation and still seeking political office. And this is the best choice they have. Bernie Sanders is popular, but not getting the numbers. So you have the most politician-y politician. I realize I'm making up words. In radio, we get to do this. And then you have Donald Trump, the most anti-politician-y politician, I guess is how we have to describe it. So the entire problem in the political process is summed up in those two people, assuming they both become the nominees. Now, I think there's a lot of fear-mongering by American media. American media right now is a lot better off making it look like Donald Trump is on a road to victory because they know that scares people. So media gets to sort of sensationalize it. They get to talk about that more than the actual numbers. And in turn, that only helps Trump because his people hate the media as well. So I think it's really interesting. I'm glad I don't have to vote in it because I don't like any of the options. But what I will say is that as a Canadian looking at the process, it makes our system look a lot boring. I think, I mean, despite the fact that we had, you know, a joke about Trudeau's hair in a conservative ad, we really didn't go down that road of becoming an absolute gong show. So if I had to predict now, I'd say Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, Hillary Clinton is the Democratic nominee. What happens from there, I have no idea though.
I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
What do you think will happen, maybe be better or worse if Donald Trump gets elected?
Don't
really like any of them, so.
Yeah, I mean, for the Republican Party, I think it's better if Hillary Clinton wins. And the reason I say that is because let's look at the Alberta situation here. So you have a premier that a lot of people think is anti-energy, that a lot of people think is pro-tax. Whether that's true or not, that's the perception that a lot of people have. At the end of her 4-year term, she can't blame anyone else for what's happened. She can't say, well, you know, I wanted to do this, but the opposition wouldn't let me. She's got a majority. She can do whatever she wants. If you have a Redford in there, for example, who was despised, the PCs have to move past her to win an election. And we saw that didn't really work out well for them. And I look at the Republican Party right now. If Donald Trump gets to define for 4 years what it means to be Republican, I don't think I'm going to like as a conservative the direction that that goes. So what will happen at the end of it is the Republican Party will have to say, okay, no. We have to do damage control on that. And we need to find another guy or lady, and we need to go forward and advance that. And you're fighting two battles. Where if Hillary Clinton is the president, in 4 years, the Republicans can fight the Democrats. They don't have to deal with a battle inside their own ranks.
Okay. I have another question.
Sure, why not?
What's your take on what's your take on Justin Trudeau and letting in all the Syrian refugees, and what's your take on that situation?
This is an issue where you're going to ask conservatives and you're going to get different answers from it. I think Canada has an obligation to be a humanitarian leader, and I think that involves taking in refugees. What I don't believe we should be doing is turning people into political tools. When he set the number in the election of 25,000, everyone knew that was impossible. Everyone knew it couldn't happen. And what happened? They admitted after he got elected, oh yeah, that was a number that we can't actually do. It's going to take longer. Now, I was happy that they did that. I was happy they took longer because it meant we're not going to rush this through. We're going to look at the best possible scenarios here. But the problem was that by that point, Canadians had already made up their mind. Canadians were moving towards a Trudeau premiership, and Canadians were saying, okay, yep, they're taking it seriously. They're bringing in 25,000. So the problem is that when you have an international crisis that happens in the middle of an election, it's not about the humanitarian aid. It's not about the refugees. It's about the politics of it. But I want to respond to your question with a question here, not for you necessarily, but for everyone in the room to think about. You remember the photo that really started this discussion of the refugees, right? It was that 2-year-old boy face down dead on a beach. Just by nodding or shaking your head. Does everyone know what I'm talking about here? Okay. The Syrian refugee crisis. What year did it start? Shout it out.
I'm not sure.
That's a good microphone. I can't hear what anyone outside of Colton is saying. The answer is 2011. The Syrian Civil War happened in 2011. Did one person get it in the back there?
Yep.
Okay, good. I saw her grinning and looking around. Okay, you get points there. But it happened in 2011, before the last federal election, the one before this one. And in the 4 years since, it was already going on. Where were the Liberals and the NDP on it in 2012, in 2013, in 2014, for the first 9 months of 2015? No one was talking about it until that picture came out. And in spite of that picture, the father of the boy was smuggling humans illegally. He was smuggling people. He was a criminal. But the photo of the dead 2-year-old boy broke my heart and broke everyone's heart. And that kicked people into action during an election. It was about politics. We have an obligation, but does anyone else find it a little bit weird that we didn't realize we had an obligation until there were votes at stake? And then I look at another issue that came. We had conservatives in the election talking about the importance of national security and fighting terrorism. And then we had the Liberals saying, you're overstating it, you're fear-mongering, it's not happening. Well, what happened 2 weeks after the election? The terrorist attack in Paris. Let's trade situations here. Let's take out the photo of Alan Kurdi and let's put in the Paris terrorist attacks in the middle of the election instead of the refugee photo. I think we're looking at a very different outcome. I think if you switch those situations, we're seeing Prime Minister Stephen Harper in office right now and Justin Trudeau not in office. And this is because politics always trumps reality when you're dealing with an election. And I don't want to make you pessimistic, Because the good news is we only have elections every few years, and the rest of the time we're in the real world here and in real life. But the fact of the matter is we need to recognize that when you look at refugees, we're dealing with human beings. We're dealing with human beings that have their own families, their own struggles, and yeah, human beings that are fleeing an absolutely vicious dictatorship in Syria. But we are also dealing with a world where there are national security threats, where people, especially in Europe, have used fraudulent Syrian passports to claim refugee status. Germany brought in 1 million refugees in the last year. And then does anyone know what happened on New Year's Eve in Germany?
Yep. Yeah.
You had mass sexual assaults at a New Year's Eve party. 99% of the suspects were refugees or migrants. So Germany, which had brought in 1 million people out of a population of 80 million, so 1/80th of their population they increased in a year, realized, shoot, we need to start putting security before just opening the doors. 25,000 is a far cry from 1 million. Canada is looking after this in a responsible way, but we also have to remember that it's not as simple as just opening the doors because the people need help. Refugees are not coming from Syria. They're coming from camps where they are right now safe. So we do have the luxury of time. A lot of people don't realize that. They think they're getting on a plane in Syria and coming directly to Toronto. They aren't. They're already in a place where they are being screened and monitored. I think it's important. I'm glad that Canada is playing a role. I don't like that the number got ahead of the actual obligation we have as humanitarians, though.
Okay. So do you think maybe it was a good idea, or no, never mind, not that. Do you think the Liberals, or do you think Trudeau got in mainly based on that perspective that, because he thinks that he's saying we're going to bring them in a lot faster than Stephen Harper, but even though Stephen Harper was saying he was going to bring them in, but he wanted to do a extra screening process, do you maybe agree more with Trudeau's way of thinking of it, like we need to bring them in sooner rather than
I don't think
we have the screening, but
I think people would be surprised at how similar Harper's position was to Trudeau's. People would be surprised. They weren't advocating for different things. They were advocating for different timelines. And that's very important. I mean, the Conservatives were saying 10,000 refugees just to start and then to look at extending it, whereas the Liberals were saying, no, 25,000 by January 1st, and it didn't happen. So in the end, Trudeau did exactly what Harper said he was going to do, but he got the points for it. I don't think that was the biggest thing that drove people to the polls. I don't think that people were voting for Trudeau just because of the refugee issue. I think people were tired of Harper. He had been there for 10 years. He's not a likable guy publicly. I've met him on a number of occasions. He's personable, but he's not that Trudeau, 3 buttons undone on the shirt, hanging out, having a beer with him. He's very stern. I mean, he's like that. I don't want to pinpoint any teachers here, but he's like that in my case anyway, when I was in school, that math teacher that, yeah, he's a smart guy, he's a bright guy, but he's not the one you want to have a conversation with because he's scary. And I think a lot of people thought that about Harper. I have never seen in Canada a politician as hated as Stephen Harper. Not disliked, but hated. And I don't know if that's partially because of social media. People are elevating their discontent a little bit more. There were a number of factors that went into it. I think as far as what's right or wrong in the refugees, I don't think it's that Trudeau is right and Harper is wrong or the other way around. I think the fact of the matter is it's not for a prime minister to decide because the process was already underway. So I don't think it really makes a difference because it was already in progress when Trudeau got elected.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Who's next? All right, Damien.
Hello, I'm Damien.
Hi.
So my question is like, as you've said, you don't shy away from making your personal opinion known. Do you ever have to watch what you say or how you word something for fear of backlash? Because you've got the new media platforms that give you access to all these different people. They have the same way to reach you and let them know or let you know what they feel.
And they do. Trust me, they do. Oh yeah, it's an ongoing battle, you know, especially for people like me who were using social media before its power was known. It became very difficult to, people didn't know how permanent it was when Twitter came out. People didn't know how permanent Facebook was when it came out. People didn't know all this stuff. So absolutely, there are things that I wrote in the early days of social media that I would never write today. And because I didn't understand it, or because context was lacking. I mean, you're responding to something, but people only see what your response was. They don't see the context of what you were actually responding to. So that's definitely a problem. And for younger people as well, that's a problem, because the things you say, you know, between friends are always going to be different than what you'd say publicly. Well, when you're communicating with your friends digitally, you have to always keep that permanence in mind. You have to always keep screenshots and stuff like that in mind. And unless you're doing everything on Snapchat where it goes away, I think you can still screenshot on Snapchat anyway, but unless, you know, your messages and everything's disappearing, you're always going to have to worry about, okay, how would I feel if this were broadcast? And you have to always think of that with social media and blogging. Now, to answer your question more directly about where that affects me personally, I, generally speaking, have a personal, not rule, but a personal guiding principle that I don't say anything that I wouldn't say publicly as far as what my opinions are. You know, everything that I believe, I am willing to stand behind. I have a reason for it. Would I swear when I'm hanging out with friends? Maybe. Would I swear on the radio show? Only once. I would never get the opportunity to do it a second time, I assure you. But it's not even that I worry about that element of it. It's that in general, I think societally, people need to be more aware of the fact that there is going to be that permanence to it. Is that even if you are just chatting between friends, or it's a Facebook message, I mean, look at how many times politicians have been sunk by some screenshot of a message that they sent thinking it was private, stuff like that. I've sent emails to the wrong people. I almost did it this morning, actually. I was sending an email about someone, and because they were on my mind, I accidentally typed in their name in the to field. And I always like triple check before I send it. I'm like, shoot, I got to erase that and send it to the right person. It wasn't anything that bad. Like I could have gotten my way out of it. But stuff like that, it's so easy because communication is so instant now. It's so easy to get caught in that trap, if you will, of forgetting that you're not just talking to one person. So as far as my opinions go, yeah, I'm open about anything. I'm public about anything. As far as in the past, has it always been the case? No. And you know what? If you have to make amends for things you've written in the past, that's a fact of life. I would give advice to you as people that are kind of in that place right now that I wasn't, which is having social media at your disposal. Just remember, okay, in 10 years, is this something you can stand behind with anything, even if it's just a text to a friend?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And they just keep coming.
See, you just need to get one or two to get the ball rolling.
Hi, I'm Ray, and this will probably be quicker than the other ones. But earlier you said that you were on medical leave and you just got bored and that's why you started writing. I'm curious, what was the first subject that you actually started writing about?
I don't remember the first post I ever wrote, to be honest. It was probably terrible. It probably had like spelling and grammatical errors and whatnot. I've improved in the process. I've always been interested in politics. That's always been my topic of interest. So I started blogging in 2009. In 2009, there was no election. So I was probably writing about, I'm trying to remember what the big issues of that year were. To be honest, I can't remember. I know general political stuff. I never had like a specific area of focus. But what I did always like was writing about issues, and I still do, of free speech. This is just one of my sort of pet projects, if you will. So that's always been of interest since I started blogging. I just can't remember if I started right away on that issue or if I grew into it later on.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we've got another one. Awesome.
We got the expert on the Syrian refugee crisis up. All right.
There we go. I was just wondering who was your most challenging to interview and why?
Okay, I'll give two answers on this one because they're two different reasons. The first would have been a woman, her name is Ivanka Servila. She is the president of Belarus, which is a country that most people could probably not point out on a map. For her, it was tough because there was a language barrier there. So I was interviewing her, and she had me, and I never do this. I never give people questions in advance because I like the conversational feel of interviews. But she wanted to know questions in advance so she could write them out, her answers out, just so she'd know that she could get a good English translation in. And she was really great. And I'm like, wow, her English is awesome. This is great. She is more self-conscious than she needs to be. And I'm like, because her English is so great, I'm going to start asking her different questions that I didn't tell her about. Her English was only great because she knew the questions and had written the answers out. So I asked her like one other question, and I hear her like rustling through pages and then like just saying for like 5 minutes and trying to like put the odd English word in. It was not a good interview for that reason. So I ended up learning my lesson of trying to avoid interviews with people that have a really strong difficulty with English. So that was difficult. For different reasons, though, one of the most difficult was, has anyone heard of Westboro Baptist Church? Okay, so Westboro Baptist Church is a terrible organization down in Kansas. They believe that all gay people are going to hell. They believe that all Muslims are going to hell. They believe that pretty much everyone but them is going to hell. It's actually on their website. They even have a website called godhatescanada.com. So we're all on a bobsled to hell as well, according to them. And I interviewed one of the leaders of that church because they had just been denied entry into Canada because there was a concern that they were going to be here for hate speech. And I wanted to talk to them and say, okay, look, because as much as I hate everything they stand for, I believe in free speech. I believe they should have had the right to speak here. So I spoke to one of their people on my show. And it was a terrible interview because when you're talking to someone that you have no common ground with, there's no ability to do any of the things that I normally rely on in an interview, like developing a rapport. So I can talk to a liberal politician that I don't like, and we all agree on the fact that we want what's best for the country. We all agree on a couple of fundamental things that we can use to form our discussion. When you're talking to someone that can't even agree on the most basic of points with you, you can't get anywhere. So ultimately, it was an interview with her shouting over me shouting over her, and ultimately me hanging up on her because she just wasn't listening. And that was fun. I don't normally like doing that, but that was fun to do there. But that was challenging as well because it became more of an entertainment thing than an actual constructive discussion. And as much as that might be fun to listen to, I prefer a discussion that actually accomplishes something, and I really didn't get that out of her.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for answering all those questions. And I know there might be
you had someone standing up behind you there. Do we have one more?
Okay, I'll let him have his question. Thank you.
Hello again.
Hey again.
Good. So we've discussed all the other parties in Canada. So I was wondering what your thoughts on the Green Party were and what they stand for.
Do they know what they stand for today? Here's the thing. I think that the Green Party is unique. I think that the Green Party is a party that definitely has a solid mandate. I have to wonder if in our current political system, and again, I stress in our current system, which does not allow for them to have any more than one seat, if they could be a little bit more forceful as an advocacy group rather than a political party. And I don't know the answer to that question. Elizabeth May, I've interviewed her. She's very nice. She's very smart. But she had to put all of her party's resources nationally into just getting herself elected. Was the Green Party in the last election when you aren't talking about these issues nationally, you're only talking about them in Saanich Gulf Islands, British Columbia. So for her, I would say she's effective, but I think she could be a heck of a lot more effective as the head of the head of a charity dealing with green issues rather than as a political party. I think we have the Prime Minister right now who's talking about a lot of green issues. We have Premier of Alberta talking about them. The Premier of Ontario is talking about them. I'm not sure the Green Party is a necessity anymore. Do they have a right to be in the system? Absolutely. I just don't know if it's the best use of resources.
Sweet, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else with a pressing question? Because this has been don't shuffle, people. This is always what they do to me at the end of the day. I actually have one more question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about, you were talking about the freedom of speech, and that's one of the things that you advocate for in this country. And I'm wondering how you felt, or how you still feel, about what happened with some of your fellow rebel journalists earlier this year, and where they weren't allowed to participate in some of our premier's media events.
Yeah, does your class know about the backstory there?
I'm not sure how much they know. I'm the English teacher, not the social studies teacher,
Okay.
and I can only work so much in at a time.
Okay, so I'll give the 30-second sort of in a nutshell story here. So I, in addition to my regular radio show, also do a podcast every week for The Rebel, which is a unabashedly conservative online publication founded by hometown Alberta boy Ezra Levant, who now lives in Toronto, because you have to in media in Canada. So Rebel has an Alberta bureau, which is staffed by two lovely young women, Sheila Gunn-Reid and Holly Nicholas. They are both very smart, very capable, and they are both journalists. But they are conservative journalists. They do opinion journalism in the same way that I do. They wanted to cover the budget and an energy briefing that the Alberta government was doing, and they were denied entry because the government, the NDP, didn't recognize them as journalists. And they were caught on video actually being ejected from an event. One person was already in the room and got kicked out, and the other one wasn't allowed in. And this sparked a huge discussion about what is a journalist. And this goes back to what I was telling you about at the beginning of the segment here, which is that for people in media, we've had to not only evolve on our platform, we've also had to evolve in terms of the definition. I'm a radio host. I don't go out there and investigate stories the same way that a health reporter does, but am I a journalist? Yeah. I'm an opinion journalist, though, which is a form of journalism, and there are dozens of types. And what happened here was that they got a response in writing from the government saying, no, you aren't journalists. We don't recognize you as journalists. So people in the country, in media, who hate the Rebel, who hate Ezra Levant, who hate the idea of, conservative-driven journalism, even they were defending the Rebel, saying, look, once we allow the government the right to ban people who disagree with them, we're allowing the government to ban anyone who criticizes them. And that's not free speech. That's not a free press. If you look at the First Amendment in the United States or the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, both countries unequivocally guarantee freedom of the press. The second a government starts saying, no, we don't recognize you as a journalist, that's where we get very close to fascism. I'm not talking about Nazism. Fascism is more broad than that. So I think that it was shameful that it happened, but I was very pleased that most people in media in Canada defended the Rebel, because people recognize, look, the government does not have the right to decide who is and is not a journalist, and who does and does not have the right to criticize them.
Thank you very much. I'm pretty sure we could have spent an hour just on that one.
Absolutely.
All right, so thank you very much for your time. And on behalf of my class and Mr. Campbell's crew, we want to thank you very much for spending this hour with us out of your busy day. And maybe we can do this again someday.
I'd be honored. Thank you very much for the invitation. I never got to do anything cool like this when I was in school.
All righty. Thank you very much. And have a...
I don't get applause at the end of my radio show, so thank you.
You're very welcome. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll sign off.